All right, so maybe back to page 1. So notice the date on here, November 2019. I actually made this presentation, and there was a issue with the power not being connected. And so we were working on battery power, and after about 10 minutes, it died. The computer died. It could not be charged quickly, so ADG was called off. So I got 10 minutes into it. Now, I have the good fortune that my son lived in Connecticut, in old Connecticut, the part that was initially settled in 1635, 15 years after the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth. He lived there for roughly 10 years. Now he's on the West Coast, but so there's so much history there. So we'll get into it. But anyway, the old part of Connecticut, which is in the center part, is focused around the town of Saybrook, the initial settlement is in 1635, 15 years after the Mayflower. All right, so oh, I'm sorry, wrong button. All right, so day 1, when the Pilgrims landed, it was not a vacuum. There were Indians there, and there were a lot of speaking Indians, a lot of different tribes, all of them speaking one language, Algonquin. The Algonquin-speaking Indians lived throughout New England, as laid out in this here. On this page, the two important ones from my standpoint are the Mohegans, as in the last of the Mohegans in Connecticut, and the Pequot, as in who were in Connecticut. The others you may have heard, Wampanoags in Massachusetts, etc. Some of these are familiar, some aren't to me. But the point is, they were, and by the way, Indians were not united. They were in competition with each other. And sometimes when they were on the short end of the stick, not as powerful as their opponent, they would ally themselves with the English or the Dutch or whatever Europeans were in the vicinity. And by the way, it was not just the English, but the Dutch were there as well. Remember that New York City was initially called New Amsterdam because it was a Dutch city, Dutch town at the time. So this was not a vacuum. Now this is hard to read. So, but there's a lot of good information here. So this is what's going on in the world simultaneously. So you put things in context. What's going on in America and what's going on in England in particular. So again, 1635 is about half where the green is. Where is the date, the year that Connecticut was initially settled by English. There were Dutch in the area as well. But to begin with, so 1635, and roughly 200 years earlier, the Gutenberg printing press was invented, and then we had our Bible and what have you. And that's 1639, 1642, 1692, 1492, Columbus, of course, arrives in the New World. 1509, about 17 years later, Henry VIII divorces his wife, which causes which really puts England in turmoil, puts the Pope, makes the Pope a strong enemy, and Henry VIII, King Henry VIII, declared himself to be declared the existence of the English Anglican Church, which was out of the embers of Catholic England prior. He So there's a squabble between Catholic Church and the new Church of England, and Henry wins most of the battles there. Then about 10 years later, Martin Luther posts his complaints, his 97 complaints against the Catholic Church, and launching the Lutherans and the Protestant Revolution, at least in Germany, and spreading out from Germany. In 1521, Cortez conquers the Aztecs in Mexico. I mean, there's a lot going on. Then Mary, from Queen of Scots, becomes the head of the death of the king. She becomes the Queen of England. She was called Bloody Mary, and it was she was very, very Catholic, and very much anti-Protestant. Then 1558, Queen Elizabeth becomes a ruler because of the death of Mary. And she is a diplomat. She knows the conflicts on both sides and the power structure, and she toes the center line and does a pretty good job of not making enemies. The person following her, King James, was from whom the King James Bible was, under whom the King James Bible was created. In 1607, the English arrive in Jamestown, Virginia, the first English, and Pilgrims arrive at 1620 in Plymouth, as we know. In 1635, Saybrook, the English arrive there in Saybrook, Connecticut. We'll get to this. There are major Pequot wars between the English and the Pequot Indians 2 years later, and the English fought. They attacked at night, at like 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and just caught the Indians totally out of surprise. And they were brutal. The English were. They had a lot at stake, and they killed a lot of warriors. I don't think I need to go. Oliver Cromwell comes to power about 20, 30 years later, etc. So, and in 1685, King James II was disposed. He was the last Catholic king of England. And thereon, it's, and then finally in 1703, Scotland joins with England to become Great Britain. So they become unified to that degree. So moving on. But the point is, there was a lot going on, and it was it had a lot of impact on situations later on. Parliament was finally dissolved by King James. There was a power struggle between Parliament and King James, and King James had a temporary advantage when he dissolved Parliament, but that came back to bite him. King James was not at all sympathetic to Puritans. One reason the Puritans wanted to leave England. Initially, they went to Holland for roughly a dozen years, and no surprise, they decided they want their children to be raised as Englishmen, not as Dutch people. So they came west, arrived here, I think in October. Planting season is long gone. There's no chance of having any kind of crops, zero chance of that. And fortunately, some Indians helped them out with food during that first winter, which I'm sure they were very sorry that they did that, because they allowed the English to get a presence in North America. The English land in the United States, in what is now America, were basically owned initially by the king. The king didn't have the time or patience or whatever to manage it, so he split it up between various members of the Lords, the House of Lords, as opposed to the House of Commons. House of Lords was much more important in those days. It's just a rubber stamp right now. Anyway, there was a Lord Say, S-A-Y-E, and Lord Brooke. And they were given much of the property that's now Connecticut, being members of the House of Lords. So they decided to create a settlement at the mouth of the Connecticut River, which is the main river through New England. So obviously the town became called Saybrook. So so here in pretty much chronological order, these are the colonies that the English founded in New England, starting with Plymouth Colony and Massachusetts Bay Colony, and going down. And there was a Saybrook Colony, and then a New Haven Colony, New Haven being the capital of the current capital of Connecticut, and then finally Connecticut Colony. So there were a lot of colonies. It was very turbulent, very, very chaotic, and they're all scrambling. And you asked where the borders were, and the borders were always in dispute. They always wanted that other person's land, etc. So chaos to a degree. So I don't know if you can see this. So notice the boundaries are being disputed. Rhode Island was claimed by Connecticut all the way up to the main waterway there. New Haven Colony merged with Connecticut Colony to form, and again, Saybrook was a colony early on as well. You see, Long Island was claimed by the Connecticut initially, so a lot of turbulence. Move on. There's more here, but it takes time to explain, and it takes time for me to read it, etc. So initially, the colony was deeded by the king to John Winthrop, who was the son of the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony, and it was deeded, etc. So it finally became, third bullet here, Lord Say and Lord Brooke, both members of Parliament. They intended to come here to see the colony. They never did. They never left the comfort of England for the backwoods and the Indian conflicts and all that in the New World. In 1620, 1 year after Saybrook was founded, 1636, it had a total of 24 residents. So, and many more, an order of magnitude more Indians. So the first thing they did was build a fort. So, and the many more Englishmen were planned to come, but England went into a civil war with Oliver Cromwell. And so many stayed back in England to participate in that civil war. Dutch were in competition, Dutch traders and Dutch military. So one of the first things they did was build a fort right at the mouth of the main river, the Connecticut River, to keep out the Indians and also to keep out the Dutch. The Dutch were as big a threat in their eyes as the Indians. The Cletus School of Connecticut was founded in 1701, which would be 66 years after. It was moved in Saybrook. It was then moved from Saybrook to New Haven, and 15 years later, it was renamed Yale University. not university, but just Yale, or Yale School or whatever, right? But it became Yale University in time. So, started in Saybrook. Now, I thought we ought to read it because there's a lot of good information here. So it was the first English settlement in the South Shore of New England, named for, I call them Lord Say and Lord Brooke, but technically they're viscounts and other titles. They received a patent meaning a land grant. Doesn't mean a patent as we for inventions. So the fort was established at the mouth of the Connecticut River to protect the English colonists against the Dutch and against the Indians. The first church founded was organized in 1646, which was 11 years after. And I have been in that church service on Sunday. It's obviously it's Congregational church. Not much else up in that area. All right, move on. So there was a siege of the Pequots. Again, the fort was constructed a year after the settlers arrived. The purpose was, as stated, to protect against the Indians, Pequot Indians, and the Dutch traders. And you can see some killing, but it's very small numbers, 2 soldiers, 2 more soldiers, etc. But when the English decided to kill, they made up for lost time and they killed much greater numbers. The English families, the soldiers, the men, warriors, and the women stayed mostly within the fort, waiting for reinforcements, which almost never happened. So the Pequots were, by the standards of New England, Pequots were a very aggressive Indian tribe and closely related to the Mohicans. And they were resented by the more peaceful tribes. Again, sometimes the tribes would align themselves with the English or the Dutch to counterbalance a stronger tribe. Both sides were barbarous. And then in 1638, there was a pre-dawn raid on the Pequots by the English, and they burnt most of the settlement. They killed about 600 people, Indians, and that put an end to it. And the surviving Indians were sold as slaves to other tribes, other Indian tribes, etc. So they didn't mess around. By the way, there's Pequots today operate a casino naturally in Connecticut. That's the way it goes. And there are several DVDs about the Pequot Wars, which I have commercial. Yes, exactly.
If there were 600 Indians, how many American soldiers English were there?
Much smaller numbers. That's why you attack at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. Yeah, a little bit easier. And this is a lot of detail about the war against the Pequots, the location of the Saybrook Fort, and the tools and armaments and all that. So it's fine print and not appropriate to get into here.
Again, I think it just has to be observed that this was English invasion of America, genocide, people, right?
Yes.
In effect, they were trying to
Well,
but they were pretty aggressive.
Yes, they were. So, I mean, they were. So it was kill or be killed. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no question, no question. I mean,
It's not like it's not like they both just arrived and thought about this
it,
territory.
it was a take,
Right or wrong, they're all dead.
Nobody's right or
it was a taking of property.
Well, and it's certainly Englishmen had, weapons, firearms.
Sure, that's right.
Well, where's the other, Indian tribes also helping with this?
Some.
If they were smugglers,
Well, no. I mean, some of them had some animosity built up against that other tribe. So now they had an ally, at least temporarily, an ally in the English or the Dutch. So you're my friend today. Watch out for tomorrow. So the first church what was Congregational, of course, in 1646, which would make it 11 years after landing in 1635. I have been in that church on a Sunday for the service. They had guards during the church service to protect the families in the church. One of the reverends of that church, named Buckingham, was also a founder and a teacher at the collegiate school, which became Yale. Initially was in Saybrook, but moved to New Haven. And that was the first location. The church then moved after decades. The church substituted as a meeting ground during the week when it was no a community hall, if you will, for community meetings, et cetera, planning how to deal with the Indians and all the other issues that were going on in the Dutch as well. And that church, that second church location, was on Church Street, which is the street my son lived on. It's 1 block long, Church Street. But there was only one church. Only one type of church, Congregational, at least in the early years. So no Catholic church, no nothing of that sort. Interestingly, that church in 1961, when churches were deciding to join UC, when Congregational churches were making the decision to join UCC, they decided not to, by a very substantial vote, 78-20. They voted against joining UCC. Now, my guess is churches that have their own legacy, their own history, their own bragging rights, tend not to want to water it down by joining, a small part of a much larger organization. That's my guess of what happened. I don't know, but the largest UCC, the largest Congregational church in Los Angeles, which is the First Congregational Church of Los Angeles, did not join UCC. And I don't know, I don't think it has yet, but did it finally do so? But they were quite large. Back in World War II, I knew about it from the LA Times. They had a substantial spread. And Mary, did you have your hand up?
I just wondered, so the Dutch by this time are the Puritans had moved back to Holland by this time.
The Puritans said what?
The Puritans moved to Holland and took everybody to Holland, right?
No. That was before. Before they came across the Atlantic,
Okay.
they went to Holland.
Maybe I misunderstood. Did you say that initially it was the Friends and the Puritans that were here? I just wondered what happened to that in terms of the
Church
Dutch.
was
They
Massachusetts.
Okay, so they weren't in this area, they were somewhere.
So they arrived here in 1635, so about a decade earlier, 1625 plus or minus. They were so upset with the way the king was interacting with Protestants and doing, and not to their benefit, that they wanted to leave England. So they went to Holland, close by. It took a half an hour, I'm guessing. So I mean, it didn't take very long to get there with their families. But after roughly a decade, they were deciding that their families were being raised as Dutch people with Dutch language and all that and Dutch traditions. And they wanted to reconnect them with their own English traditions. And they could do that. They had to leave the Holland to do that. So at that point, they decided to come back, to come to America but they stopped supplies, etc., in England before coming across the Atlantic. So again, they arrived in 1635, 15 years after the settlement of Plymouth. All right. So just so they did not join UCC, at least not at that time. And their hymnal, which I was in their church singing out of their hymnal, and their hymnal was not the kind of UCC hymnal we see, but it was titled Hymns of a Pilgrim People, Congregational Hymnal by the National Association of Congregational Churches, not UCC. So
how many of them are there still?
I don't know. I don't know. But it was interesting being a non-UCC congregational church that had centuries of history. So there's a bunch of additional photos, which Rick, we're going to see this, I think. Okay, yes. All right. So you're not going to read the fine print, but it's capable of being read when you look at it closely. So there are, I think, 4 locations, 4 different churches in sequence, church and meeting house. And this is built in 1647. They arrived in 35, so that's 12 years later. So if we had the time and patience, we could read this, and it would tell a lot. Second meeting house, 1681, and a bit bigger. And even bigger, with a big tower, steeple, etc. Two-story. So they're getting prosperous. And these are all in the same, near the same location, right near where my son lived. They're within very short walking distance. I didn't hear that. Say it
Oh, I
again.
was just reading that bottom line.
Bottom line.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
They have to sit, yeah.
Yeah. Teenage females cannot sit with teenage males.
Yeah.
That's a no-no. Hanky panky. So again, the church is also a meeting house. Let's go on. This is the 4th, I believe the last, 1840. Almost all in the same location. A stone's throw if they're not the same. And I'll move on. But the 4th one is the final, the present. And I have some photos in here, a small part of it. There it is, same church. Same. And the announcements are on this side over here. There's the announcements. Notice the 9 o'clock jazz service. And the church is not heavily populated, at least not that time. Very white.
So Jim, is this the only one used as a church now, or the others just museums?
I can't answer. I don't know enough about it. Notice the hymnals, red and non-UCC. That's just nothing unique to this, but it just shows the nearby. This is the river, main river, Connecticut River. Now, I didn't study up on this last night. We had other issues. And so I really can't do justice to this, but this map I think tells a lot. And the old Saybrook, I believe is the dark square in the middle. I believe that's it. But anyway, I'm not prepared on this to talk about it. I wish I were. I wish I had studied up on it. So I guess that's the last one. All right. Okay. What time is it? So it was really to be there. What?
What page?
We were at the end, I think. Oh,
Okay.
wait, no, yes, we were
Yeah.
at the end.
Okay. I'm just gonna leave this up
Okay,
just so we have it on the
Good.
recording.
good. All right,
It said stop sharing.
Yeah. It's the Zoom being finicky. There you go.
so there's a lot more I could say if I had been able to do enough preparation, but last night we were having trouble getting this going at all. And Rick was able to help very significantly this morning. But to be there, to go to the public library and see books that are 300 pages, 300 years old or older. I mean, it's just an awful lot of history there, and people are proud of it. My son, unfortunately, is not a history buff, so he did not appreciate the gold mine they lived in. So anyway,
That shaded area, the old Saybrook.
Yeah.
yes, correct,
Yeah.
correct.
A little bit of that.
Again, the enemies were the Dutch and more importantly, the Indians. The Indians were brought under control radically that night at 4 a.m. when they were attacked and burnt, their village burnt, and many people, 600 or so people died, Indians died that early morning. And that pretty much put an end to the Pequot problem in downstate Connecticut. Questions? Again, there's more here, and I wish I was more prepared. When I started the first presentation 2.5 years ago, I was very prepared. It was all fresh in my mind and all that. But again, the computer died due to power issues. Questions? I mean, you're living there in history. I mean, Connecticut, next to Massachusetts, is one of the first northern coastal states to get really embedded with the transition from a province of Great Britain to a free country. In the meantime, and in the early part of that, the Indians were a big problem, and that was temporary.
Weren't they the natives?
What?
Weren't they the natives that originally?
Yes, The answer is yes. Yes, yes. So it's now 10 after, 12 after. Any other comments, questions? All right, thank you. Next Sunday.
I'm curious as to how the religions all kind of got established. So it sounds like wherever the congregation came from, I guess England, they in Connecticut, and that was kind of their territory.
Yes, but it was not that simple. I mean, Pilgrims hung together. You know, when they moved from I've forgotten the names of towns in England to the New World, many of them came on the same boat together, etc. And they knew that they were going into hostile territory, and so they united and worked common, had the same resources for their volunteer army, which was called up whenever a threat was there. I don't know if I answered your question, but that's as much as I know of it.
Did the religions kind of cooperate with each other? Were they kind of accepting, or was it kind of?
Oh, yes. I mean, it was all for survival, and their common enemy was the Indians and the Dutch. What? Yes, they are the invaders. Yes, 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 yes. Next Sunday, our presenter will be a videotape by E.O. Wilson, the naturalist. You've seen the War of Ants and all that. He'll be talking about something so mundane as the meaning of human existence. So, so I think he died recently, but he has got so many credits in the area of nature and human nature. And I think you'll find his take on the meaning of human existence. I think you'll find that interesting. So.
Can I just say one thing? Unfortunately, Rick's not here, but after everything that Jacob last week, which was fabulous, I just want to again from the ADG to acknowledge Kevin and Rick, because I don't know what we would ever do without you guys. But you guys do a tremendous job.
Today's presentation was something that when I presented it 2.5 years ago, it was all nice, neat. It all was tightly integrated. Today, it was fragmented. I mean, yesterday, it was fragmented. Rick helped me last night, actually at 7 a.m. this morning, putting it together, uniting it, and making it capable of being a video presentation. So Rick really helped a lot this time. So thank you for that. Anything else before we close? Thank you. A lot of times I run out of ideas and I struggle, and then I just look back at some of the things I've done a year or two ago, and it gives me fresh ideas. E.O. Wilson, in my way of thinking, does some marvelous things with the similarities between humans and insects, and there are humans. So anyway, by the way, the Sunday after that, Sunday the 22nd of May, our topic will be financial advisors, two women financial advisors the topic will be women's financial concerns. They'll be giving advice on generic problems, not personalized problems, but generic problems. So I think you'll find that interesting. So That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.